So New York, New York has become equally dystopian, right? I mean, I moved there in the 1970s where it was, killed, Death City or whatever. There was 3,000 murders a year. The Bronx was on fire. Lower East Side was a no-go zone. But you had CBGBs with the punk rock. Yeah, Uptown was in the Bronx was the beginning of the hip hop movement, right? And
all the comedy clubs started in
all the comedy clubs. So culturally, it was febrile. Is that the right word? It was a environment that was as messed up as the day-to-day life was. There was offset by a lot of cultural things were happening in that time. But at this time, it's just going downhill, like a city that's that's like Pompeii or something. Or just like a city in collapse, which is I think a lot different, and it's worrying. It's particularly for somebody. I mean, New York has always been kind of a cultural leader for the country in many ways, and so it's. My friend Alec Baldwin, shot somebody in the face and killed her. This is like the guy I went to college with. This guy at NYU. He was a good friend for 30 years. That's kind of like a poster child of where things are going. It's just mayhem.
And I feel similarly to. I've lived in LA for over 20 years, and I'm one of these people. I love LA. I'm never one of these. It's a creative epicenter, and there's all this creative energy there. But I'm just like, not only is it just the crime and the stuff we've talked about, but just Hollywood. Hollywood has always had big corporations in there that are and you got to play by their rules. The censorship and the wokeness. And dude, I'm an anti-war, pro-labor socialist, but I don't fit in Hollywood because they're all like liberal, and I'm not a liberal. They're just like, they're more hung up on identity politics. They don't care about the class warfare that America's in. They have this sort of bi-coastal arrogance, and they look down at the red staters as all dumb or whatever. And I said they have the same closed-minded craziness that the far right can have, and so culturally and ideologically, they're corrupt. And then you find out the CIA has script approval on these big movies, and you start to see Netflix and what Disney and all these companies are putting out. I'm like, they're putting out these messages that I'm like, I'm not down with this, man. Like, it should have been freedom of expression. And again, I'm a film fan, and so those movies made in the 70s were like the golden era. Like 3 Days of the Condor, The Deer Hunter, these movies that called out the war machine, that called out those in power, that, made you think differently. Rollerball, the original Rollerball. Network is Network is the most prescient movie that I've ever seen. It predicted the state we're in now. It predicted it.
And now, Patty Chayefsky, the screenwriter, is a brilliant writer.
Brilliant writer.
Or Jerzy Kosinski, who wrote Being There. They made a brilliant film of Being There.
Well, you had Patty Chayefsky. You had the Kerensky's. You had Rod Serling, who wrote the original
Twilight Zone.
Who wrote Twilight Zone, but also the Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes.
I didn't know that. Okay.
I mean, those movies would not get made in Hollywood today.
Because the history of it, of course, is that Hollywood fizzled out in the 50s with the arrival of television, and the studios are all going out of business. And so the new Hollywood arrived. Steven Spielberg, Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, and they, like the famous story of Spielberg, literally walking onto the Columbia lot and just took an office, like totally unannounced, and just set himself up. And just that's how he started his career. And they were able to be completely independent and do these projects that were, as you discussed, they were politically active. The Parallax View, Alan Pakula,
great movie.
All the President's Men. All the President's Men is an awesome film. Alan Pakula, who's the director, and it's really, the Watergate scandal, and it really is a shining moment in American journalism. And of course, after the Watergate scandal and the commercialization and undercutting of journalism in America due to crass commercialization, and the printing of a lot of fiat money has led to total degradation of the news. Also, under Reagan, you had the Fairness Doctrine. Before Reagan came along, you got rid of the Fairness Doctrine. So the Fairness Doctrine, I mean, this sounds bad, but in retrospect, maybe not so bad. If somebody went on television and expressed a point of view, a political point of view, like voting machines are bad, they, by law, had to have somebody on saying, well, voting machines are good. There was a fairness. You needed both sides. So I believe it was Reagan. They got rid of the Fairness Doctrine, which led to the polarization of TV news to these two tribes. You had the Fox versus MSNBC, and they both went to the extreme side, and they never presented the other side. So the average person then identifies with the one or the other, and they don't get the perspective or the view or the balanced view that you would expect from your news organization, which, by the way, is on the publicly funded channels supplied by the government, who is funded by the taxes, right? So there's another example of where government is not necessarily evil, in that if they can subsidize the creation of networks that carry news and information, and that news and information is informative and is telling people information they need to make decisions in their lives that are based on being informed, okay, that's not a bad thing.
No.
Okay, but that's been privatized, completely privatized, and so the results are, as you say. But the 70s are really, I talked with Stacy on our podcast all the time about movies of the 70s, because she actually has a pretty deep knowledge about these types of movies, because when she was in LA, she was working with directors and producers that came out of that era. And so we talk a lot about it.
Interject real quick. There's a great book for the audience to read called Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, about that era.
Yes. Yeah, right. And you had, of course, Taxi Driver, and you had Dog Day Afternoon with Pacino, and
based on a true story,
right? And which is a fascinating movie, and very well acted and directed. And a lot of the New York actors of that time who went to L.A. and this is the De Niro, Pacino. These were New York actors, right? Who went to a lot of Hollywood and became the anti-hero post Hollywood golden era. So it wasn't the Hollywood heroes,
tall, good-looking leading man
guys. It became Dustin Hoffman, Al Pacino. So so that era of the 70s. Now this took us all the way through until Reagan. And the movie that really changed it all was Top Gun. So Top Gun was the really Reaganism on steroids, and it began the era of this hyper-militaristic, patriotic, if you will.
So to interject, to fuel your point here and make a comparison. So Top Gun came out, was used as a recruiting tool. Recruiting went up 400% when Top Gun came out.
Right.
Just to show you where, and this is maybe a separate subject, but the new movie that came out last summer, Top Gun Maverick, crushed the box office, but the recruiting numbers didn't follow.
Really?
And I think that's because younger people are just like, nope. Anyway.
Hollywood, of course, instrumental in propaganda during World War II. They were called on to try to really flame the patriotic spirits of the country. But you mentioned New York, and just had this flash to something I was going to say a moment ago, is that in New York City, when the mafia was dominant, it was a lot safer. It was a lot different. People knew the rules, as you say. There were rules. And
Prince of the City, another great movie that just popped into my mind about New York corruption.
Then Giuliani came along, and he crushed the mafia, and they moved the Fulton Fish Market, which was a mob operation, into Queens, I believe. And I lived down on Fulton Street when I first moved to New York in 1978, 1979. My first apartment was on Fulton Street before any of the development down there, when they had the fish market. And it was a place talking about drinking in New York. So that was the place you go after hours bars, and then the after hours bar, and then at like 5 a.m. at the Fulton Fish Market, you get shots for like 25 cents. And all the truck drivers who come in with their fish are drinking heavily after having just spent 12 hours on the road or whatever, fish coming in. And so that was the place that you would continue. And all these guys had those huge hooks on their shoulder because they're moving the big boxes of fish off and on these trucks. So they use these huge hooks. And they all have them on their shoulder, and they're all at the bar. So it's a very dangerous situation to get into a fight. But of course, that's the best type of situation to get into a fight. So because people start, throwing these hooks at each, they're tearing flesh off bodies. It's like, wow, that's fantastic. So, but that all moved out to Queens. That's gone. But so it became very Disneyfied. And it's an awesome series is The Deuce. Did you see that?
I have not seen that.
It's about the porno industry in New York in the 70s, because they made essentially porno became legal, and it gave rise to the porno industry in New York, and the 42nd Street period and the era in all the sleazy hangouts in New York of the 70s and the porn era. It's incredibly well done, and it's brilliantly photographed, acted fantastically well, and it's just like an amazing series. It's so true to New York at that period. And then the last scene is the guy who's the main character is 20 years later, and he's in Times Square, and he's looking up, and he sees like all the development that happened once porno was shut down, when AIDS came, it kind of wiped out. Yeah. All the bathhouses and all those things, and the porno industry that came, and kind of like the whole city was transformed, and it became very Disneyfied, and he's walking around that era, and it's clean, it's squeaky clean, and it's great, but it lacked, that era of the 70s was, which is Taxi Driver was, captures, those scenes where he's driving through 42nd Street and those at Times Square and those areas. I mean, those are, from a documentarian point of view, Scorsese was really capturing incredible footage of what's really looked like.
Yeah. What New York, what at night, the underbelly of New York, like that's what Taxi Driver really captured. And it showed the sort of merging of the upper crust world when he, I'm blanking on her name, the actress that was working.
Jodie Foster.
No, it's
she was at the political campaign.
The political campaign. I'm blanking on her name. She was in
she went with
Moonlighting.
Bruce Moonlighting.
Yes.
The actress is Bruce.
We're blanking on her name.
Willis.
Anyway, he was showing sort of that's the upper crust New York, the big fundraiser New York, and then this is the nighttime underbelly of New York. He did a great job of that.